I want to celebrate all of these women. I want to meet them all. Mm-hmm. I want to stand beside them all in a, even if it's a virtual conference, and tell them all personally how proud I am of them, how hard I know their job is, how thankless it is sometimes.
Okay, so we're going to start at the very beginning. And as I said in the questions, when I read through your website, you obviously shared a bit of a story about you had an accident in 1979, nearly lost your arm, and basically overcame everything the doctors told you would have to go through. So
yes, ma'am.
Having to go through that and having to work hard to strengthen your arm back up, is that the reason you went down the pathway of becoming a strength coach? Is what I'd love to know.
Absolutely. Unequivocally, that accident, incident, life-changing event absolutely rerouted my life. I will back up a little bit. At the age of 13 and 14, I was already a nationally ranked athlete. I was training for the Olympics as a potential heptathlete because I was a very gifted young athlete. I was already 200 pounds by the time I was 14.
Wow.
So, I mean, I was just a big, healthy, Oklahoma born, but we were in New York. And so I had just been, my mom had us chopping 2 cords of wood. So I was just very, very gifted, a gifted striker. I was a great thrower and striker. And as you know, those 2 skills go together. And I love the stories with Katie Sowers with her little footballs. Regretfully, cameras weren't as available then, but it was so cute. I remember my first memory going to a toy store when I was like 8 years old. And I walked in and my mom said, "I'll give you anything you want." And I ran straight to the football because to me, that was my biggest passion. I absolutely loved it. But honestly, my father was a football coach at a high school. And then he was also the basketball coach because, in the middle of Oklahoma, he was at a place called Liberty Mounds High School. And he was the principal. So, they would just change lots of hats all the time. So that backstory going in then into my incident that night, it was a basketball game, a semifinal basketball game on Long Island and we were one of the 2 best teams at the time. And I was a starter, scored a few points, don't remember exactly how many. But at this time, let me just set the scene for this. In 1979, sports were really just getting some great accolades. The women's Title IX thing, I was part of the beneficiary to that initially. I want to say this was probably 12 years prior to Ruth Bader Ginsburg getting into the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So if that puts any context into this at all, it was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. So we're talking 40 years ago as of today. And so the long story short is that there was a plate that was before they had the rules in high activity doors to have plate glass replaced by safety glass. So that's the story, is that I was not paying attention. I was a kid. It was after the basketball game. My heart was racing. I was talking over my shoulder, not paying attention. The way the glass was designed, it basically came down like a guillotine on my arm. And you can still see the scar to this day, that it's actually,
wow.
All of this was there. All of that was there. And it was nothing short of miraculous, because arteries being severed, you're dead in 2 minutes. So how I'm still here, I don't know, except I've always believed in this divine destiny, that there's a great hand someplace. And if I survived that, I can survive anything. So the rest of the backdrop of my life, those decisions began morphing. And what gave me my start truly as a strength coach was when I went to college, because I had lost all my athletic scholarships. Yeah. So here I am in intensive care with an arm that healed, that was like this, that I was lucky to have attached. At the time, we knew nothing of biofeedback flooding or rehabilitation. So there were no rehabilitation specialists at the time. Every office I walked into to seek help, nobody could assist me. Matter of fact, they said, due to a controversial surgical clamp that's been put into your arm to hold your artery together, you're a liability. I wasn't allowed to go back to school at high school. For most of my senior year, I had to study at home That was before home study. So I was blessed to have the valedictorian and the salutatorian and so many great smart friends of mine that would come over and assist me. Try taking an SAT with one hand. I mean, at the time you had to hold it. So my SAT scores were abysmal because you really can't. The way they used to take them, they were timed, and you would have to have two hands, one flip, one to hold the paper, one to hold the pencil. And I was in a sling at the time. So needless to say, every direction I went to was a little bit challenging at the time. Mm-hmm. So when I landed at college on an academic scholarship in Pasadena, because that was the only way I would go to college. It was the only school that still held their extension out, but it was a working scholarship. So I scrubbed toilets for 4 years, which was very humbling. So I went from being a nationally ranked athlete to losing my arm to working my way through college, scrubbing toilets. I had a horrible attitude my freshman year. And I think that attitude adjustment, I realized I'm going to sing my way through college. I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be the happiest toilet scrubber that this university has ever seen. So I finally, with the help of Dr. Harry Snyder, who was the Olympic coach. Now, remember, in Pasadena, in California, that was the seat of the 1980 Olympics, which we boycotted. Mm-hmm. But all the Olympians were training in that Pasadena, USC, West Los Angeles area at the time. Okay. And I walked into Dr. Snyder's office with a shot put in one hand, because that's what I was best at and set a lot of records at, and then had a Bible in the other hand. Not that I was super religious, but I just wanted to know why bad things happen to good people, and I couldn't figure it out. So that was sort of the story. So I walked into his office, and he goes, I'm just going to tell you, he goes, you're a walking dichotomy, but the fact that you're, still here and you're at this campus, he goes, I'm going to bring you on as my assistant. He goes, what you need to know is that you need to turn your pain into your gain. Wow. You don't have to be in front of the camera to make a difference. You can actually make a difference because our job as coaches and teachers is to be invisible and yet invaluable. And in that lesson, I learned that I could then invisibly hold others up. And I have invested my entire career in that, and not being vested in the titles, but being more vested in the end range and knowing that the truth in the end is going to come out. And so that will sort of play into the rest of your answers for the rest of the day, because my perspective changed so dramatically in that near-death experience, being resuscitated twice. None of it made any sense. I walked into the office. He could have picked anybody to be his assistant. He and his wife, Dr. Harry Snyder and Sarah Snyder, gave me my break, my first chance. So here, you'll see right here in the center of the left there, you'll see that was me. Dr. Harry Snyder is to my right.
Okay.
So you see him there with his right leg a little bit bent.
I do, yeah.
So here was a man who had a horrible injury when he was a child. So I am assisting a man who was actually physically challenged, who could not utilize his right leg, and yet held the bench press record and a single leg squat record, because he found a way to manage his challenges. And in his mentoring me, he exposed me to some of the greatest athletes at the time. So if you follow the Olympics, Dwight Stones here, you see at the top, I was there when he set these records at like 7'7". We're standing under the high jump bar there in the center. And this was in 1981. You see my beautiful posture there. But Dwight Stones is to the far right. And his cousin, Doug Norquist, who was also a top Olympic champion, is there. And then you'll see at the very bottom, I'm training Coach Stones, who is still part of the Olympic high jump, one of the best jumping coaches in the world. And Dr. Harry's legacy lives on.
Obviously, fast forward quite a bit up until 1990, when obviously you got the role with the Jets. So I guess what I really want to ask, and what I'm really intrigued about, is over the last few years, obviously there's been so much attention about women coaches, and particularly in the US, women coaches that are breaking through to pro sports, the NBA, the NFL. And even today, there's obviously huge, big barriers to these women getting into, onto the sideline for these teams.
Right.
But back in 1990, this, a female coach working at an NFL team must have been a complete alien concept to the planet Earth. So I'd love to know kind of your experience and the reaction that you got from friends, from the media, or even from the team itself about you, the female coach, working as a strength and conditioning coach for an NFL team. How was that?
Well, I'll do my best to be as linear as possible. The woman who was the dean of recreation, her name was Pat Montagano at Hofstra University.
Mm-hmm.
And Fran Califer, who was the great volleyball coach from Hofstra University. And then Cindy Lewis, who was the women's athletic director at Hofstra. I was brought in the mid-'80s and was the head strength and conditioning specialist working with Hofstra and an adjunct professor at the time. Now, you know my name, Lee Brandon.
Yeah.
That's my given name. And actually, my formal name, this is going to be a little bit funny, my birth name that I was given. Now, I formally have changed my name since then because I got my mom on the phone when I got the offer from the Jets, because Pat Montagano put my resume in and under the pile to be in consideration, and being the head strength and conditioning coach at Hofstra, and then with all of my Olympic credibility. And I had worked with Kevin Costner at the time as one of his strength coaches, getting ready for movies. So I was sort of a very diversified strength coach with a lot of credibility. There wasn't a lot of competition at the time back in the day. And so Pat put that in that pile because she knew the head strength coach. And so I called my mom and my dad at the time. There was no conference calling. So there was like two big clunky phones with coil. And I held them up and I said, Mom, I love you. Dad, I love you. I said, and they lived in different states because they had gotten divorced when I was very young. And that's a whole nother story. But I said, I love you dearly, but I'm not sure how you named a 21-inch long person Bertha. I said, but I am right now under consideration to be hired. And because basement Bertha and Bertha butt, and I can't tell you the hardship and the bullying that I received, which is in part why I had to become so strong, because I couldn't survive that with a name like that in the middle of New York with a Southern accent in the Brentwood School District. So long story short, fast forward, my mom said, I completely understand. I didn't want to name you that anyway. And my dad goes, well, that was my mom's name. And I said, well, listen, I'm going to keep the B because when I turn 90, I'll put back on the Eartha. So it's B. Brandon. So I sent my resume in and nobody would know because it's a non-gendered name.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if you look at a lot of the women at the time, I have to go back, look at Nancy Lieberman. She was one of my contemporaries. Look at, Lynn St. James. She was one of the first race car women, yet you wouldn't really hear a lot about these women. Meg Ritchie. She was a head strength and conditioning coach in the mid-'80s over at the University of Arizona. She brought me in and, showed me how to get it done. And I owe a lot of what I did with not just my confidence, but they built me up. And on the foundation of having so many great coaches around me, I just said, I'm just going to walk through the door. I'm not afraid of what they can throw at me. What's the worst they can do is say no. I've already been through worst. I've lost my arm and my life. I can handle no. But you'll never know unless you walk through the door.
Yeah.
So the story is that I walked into the door and there was a room full of men and me. And Coach Greg McCready was the head strength and conditioning coach at the time, of which, by the way, we're still in close contact. And he was the gentleman that hired me with the permission of Coach Bruce Coslett, who was our head coach at the time. And basically, he looked at me and he goes, well, is this a joke? And I looked over my shoulder because I wasn't sure he was talking to. And I said, no, sir. And he goes, well, we have strength requirements. It didn't quite go this way, but this is my 30-year-ago version. And he might have a little different version, but this is pretty much the Monarch version of this. And he goes, well, we have strength requirements here because people's lives depend on us as strength coaches. I said, done. He goes, well, you have to deadlift 315. I said, show me the bar. And I went over with all the, the guys. We were all in there. and did it 3 times.
Wow.
And that was, I got the job. My first job with the Jets was that he looked at me because Coach pointed to this, one of the biggest centers that we had at the time. He was almost 7 foot tall. If he wasn't 7 foot, he was the biggest man I'd ever seen in my life. He took up the entire doorway and had to dip his head. His name was Brett Miller. And he was our one of our big offensive linemen. And Coach looked at me and he goes, Lee, I want you to go over and you're going to do this. And so this was my first test. So here's how I got the job. So Brett and I went over, I followed the coach's routine. We started out, we warmed up at 3:15. Now, mind you, I'm going to set the scene. There's a room full, this is preseason 1990. There's a room full of men and me. I didn't care. I was used to being around. It didn't matter to me one way or the other. And so I said, I'm just here to do my job. So I said, all right, Brett, let's warm up 3:15 for 7. We're going to go to 4:05. Then we're going to take it on up. So we got up, that bar was up over 500 pounds. And I leaned over his head and he's holding that bar when his arms were bigger than my thighs and as long as my thighs. So when you're spotting a bench press, you have to be able to pull that off. So when he failed to be able to get that back up off of his chest, I looked over him and I leaned down and I said, 2 more. And that was it. So I had to deadlift it off of his chest the next 2 times.
Wow.
And what happened was you could have heard a pin drop in this pin of this big, huge room of men. I describe it like a bullpen because their eyes are big, their necks are big, their heads are big. They are gigantic human beings. And I'm not tiny, but I could do my job. So when I deadlifted that off and racked it, the applause just burst out. Everybody started cheering me on. It was like, it was the coolest thing. I turned around and I was in. So I proved that I could do the job. So I really think, it had nothing to do with my gender. It had nothing to do with any of that. I was blessed to meet Mr. Hess, who was the owner at the time. And he walked up to me and he goes, are you the young lady causing all the stir around here? And I said, yes, sir. But I was really, honestly, because I wanted to keep my job. So I was told, be seen and not heard. Wow. Stay under the radar. And you'll see the picture here that was written up on May 27th in 1990. Because we were already there and I was testing the athletes, and you can see me there standing next to Coach Greg Robinson, testing the defensive line with the bench press test. So to answer your question, my genderless name, my resume, what I was blessed with experiences to that point, the gift of power, the gift of having still 2 arms. I could not have done that job with 1 arm.
So if you look back on that season, is there one particular memory that you have that kind of sticks out from that?
I worked with all sorts of guys. Troy Benson, we had some events that were pretty exciting. And this is one of the great memories that I had. We were written up in the Plainview Herald on June 1st, 1990. I pioneered with Hofstra University and the New York Jets a community program for high school football programs. And this was our pioneering effort at Plainview High School with Stan Laux, who was the athletic director at the time. You can see the pictures here on the left. And again, you have to go back to microfilm to find all these originals. And thank God I was blessed to find all the originals of all of these. So this is documented proof. And you can see here on the right, that's me with the cool Boz haircut, that old, whatever you want to call it, mullet going on there. And you see Coach Greg McCready in the background sitting there. He's the head strength coach. He came with me on that day, along with 3 or 4 different players, Troy Benson being one of them, Trevor Maddich being another one. And we just had the best time encouraging, educating, and letting the entire student body. So this was our presentation to the entire student body. And we were just discussing, giving them hope and staying substance-free. So it was an anti-substance program that we were running at the time, what we called Athletes Against Drugs. And so Coach supported me. Coach Greg McCready supported me in this, and we all loaded up in one vehicle, and we all drove over. And, I guess to answer your question about, being the first woman, that's never been my intent. I just wanted to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And I believe we did in many cases and in many lives. And going back to what Coach told me about being invisible yet invaluable. If you're a great coach or a great teacher, that's truly what I believe that we are. I believe now at this point, because a lot of people are asking me, well, why now? I said, well, it hasn't been like I've hidden it. I mean, in 1990, we were ripped up in Sports Illustrated with different pieces. I honestly believe that if I don't say something now, what happens in 20 or 30 years to our history? Mm-hmm. And it's sad because genderless, timeless, colorless, to me, you can't do a job and have it go away. It's like the movie Counting Numbers. And so these magnificent women behind the scenes working with NASA, I see this as one of those moments. I have to stand up and say something now. It's not like I'm, oh, poor me. I never wanted it to be a trumpet blower. That's not my way. My way is that I believe we need to fight now, because if you do a job, you deserve the credit for doing the job.
Yeah.
And that is it for me. And if any corporation can say your job didn't exist after being there for a year and a half, I wasn't an intern for 3 weeks. I was there for a year and a half. I had keys. I had all the secret sauce. I trained every single line. I affected every player. Every one of them knew me and worked with me. Some of the arguments I've gotten back in more recent times, since 2015, has been that, well, strength coaches aren't coaches. Well, that caught me by surprise, because I'm like, well, as far as I'm concerned, try to tell any athlete that's in any arena that a strength coach isn't a coach, or tell any of those existing strength coaches now that they're not coaches, they won't agree. And then if you look at the NFL views it on all of the websites, if you look at the list of coaches, you'll see strength coaches always listed there along with assistant strength coaches. Yeah. We are coaches. So that takes away every argument. So it is unequivocally undeniable that I was blessed to truly be a woman there, whether the Jets acknowledge it, which to date they have not. And so I am ready to celebrate with them, because I believe they fell on the right side of history 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that to me is just magical. It is something to celebrate. It's not something to look backward to go back, but it's something that I believe going forward we need to really, truly celebrate.
There's certain media that like to label coaches the first this, trailblazer this,
yes,
that yes. Sometimes they don't always do their research properly, and therefore they stick labels on athletes, coaches, the first female this, the first female that. How does it, right. I know you've just said that back then, the Jets haven't necessarily celebrated you as the first, but how does it kind of make you feel that the way female coaching is going at the moment in US sports, that your name is left out of that conversation?
I can't be more thrilled. It honestly makes me feel like the ripple effect. And for those who are in my genre, I've been public speaking and have been around in the industry for literally 40 years as a strength coach now. And I feel very blessed to have known what I wanted to do and be a career strength coach. To answer your question specifically is, I've never been one for labels. I've always been one to celebrate. Yeah. I can't be more thrilled that women are now being included in this. And I believe it was just a matter of time. The NFL was getting a lot of horrible bad press. And they realized marketing-wise that 49% of their viewers and supporters and who takes their little kids to Pop Warner, it's all women. Mm-hmm. It was just a smart business move. And honestly, with the concussion stuff and all of the bad press that had been out there, I believe it's really critical, because we as moms, we as women, having inclusion in a sport that we all love so very much. I wouldn't say anything negative, derogatory, but I believe that there's a lot of really great checks and balances that are now in place to protect the athletes and protect the coaches. And I believe it's just all truly to be celebrated. I don't see any negative or downside in any of this. And when the truth comes out, I want to be prepared to be able to say, listen, I'm just blessed to have been in that position. It doesn't mean I was better than anybody else. I didn't design my career around being the first person. I went on and have been blessed to do many things that have been genderless and timeless. And nobody can argue with, as you know, with 330 yards. So to me, expressions of power and expressions of your love for sport or whatever that we do, to me is honestly what those of us that are in the coaching and teaching arena truly believe in. And if you're blessed to have a title like that or that acknowledgement, and that's just extra, that's like the cherry on top, Yeah. So I honestly believe that all of these young men and women are to be celebrated, gender aside. But I would not want to see any of them do their job and then be refused by the admin that they didn't do the job or that they never existed there. Yeah. So to me, that's more my platform, that I've never been a squeaky wheel about it because it's never been a secret. But I honestly believe that I'm concerned that you can do a job and receive a 1099 and do your job well. I did everything they asked, and, it didn't define me. It was just one of the things that I was blessed to do.
So can we put an official plea out to the New York Jets? Can we say, please, can you celebrate the first female coach in the NFL? She's right here.
I would be so grateful. And I honestly will tell you, there's a gentleman by the name of Jared Windley who we are, for the first time in 30 years, speaking to, and he's actually reviewing all the facts now that we've provided him, the same facts that you're seeing now. Mm-hmm. And Coach Greg McCready is willing to speak to them, and he is there and saying, listen, I brought you in. I said, Coach, you need to be celebrated because you were the one that put his neck on the line for me. And when Coach Kozlet looked at him and said, hey, listen, are you sure about this hire? And he says, yeah, I'm going to vouch for her. So I even worked with Coach McCready with the New York Knicks at the time. But again, I never, that was not something that we all went around doing. I just said, Coach, what else do you need help with? And let's just go do it. Let's help these athletes.
Wow.
So yes, let's put out a plea. I believe that the New York Jets, when they hired the young woman in 2017, I've been on a mission since 2017, reaching out to every VP in there, leaving them phone calls, reaching out via LinkedIn, and just saying, hey, listen, you guys, I honestly was there. And here's the 1099 to prove it. So it's been a little bit of an uphill climb, but I feel very, confident at this point that they see that I'm not looking to cry over anything. I'm just looking to celebrate. And that's really the story.
Do you think that part of that not celebrating you as the first female coach is part of the reason why there's been such a gap between 1990 to 2015 and beyond, when we started to see women coaches, strength and conditioning, and also football coaches within the league? Do you think that's part of the reason?
Well, I honestly believe if you look back at the concussion research and when all of that negative press started coming out, there was a direct correlation between that. Again, that's just my humble opinion. Mm-hmm. I could be completely wrong. But honestly, they needed a makeover. And there needed to be some good press. Mm-hmm. And for the longevity of the sport that we all love so much, they needed to find a way to be more inclusive to women. And I believe it's a really great thing. To date, up to that point, there hadn't been a catalyst or a spark that created such controversy. And again, I could be completely wrong and completely off base on this, but I honestly believe that, I had been stating it. And to that date, you can find other articles that I was written up in. The New York Jets had 25 years to send me a note and say, because it was very obvious that I was written up there, and I was even written up in, many other papers as well. But they just, up to that point, had not acknowledged it. So I really don't have an answer. I cannot speak for them.
Yeah.
But I'm excited for the opportunity to be able to be a voice for all of the folks, whatever color, whatever gender, whatever sexuality, whatever it is, that it doesn't matter. But if you do a job, you just deserve the credit. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I just feel like I need to fight for that acknowledgement just in that. And I believe it's really to be celebrated. Mm-hmm. Like I said, Coach McCready stepping out, and sticking his neck on the line with Coach Kozlet, it was not celebrated. It was not popular. And it needed to go away. This is undeniable. The fact that I was blessed to go back and have 20 years of taxes, yeah, I actually found this original piece, and I had received other ones. But, if anybody did, like if the Jets actually went in and they actually pulled down my credit report, they'd actually see that this was truly my legitimate address. This is unequivocal proof that I was there. They paid me. I was not, whether they call me an intern or not, I was still there for a year and a half. So it doesn't matter the title. I was still considered the assistant strength coach. Yeah. That was my title. At the time, things 30 years ago were very different with the way that we got paid. So, this to me was a very exciting piece of proof that I was blessed to find.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's like a piece of NFL history right there.
I know. But again, they wouldn't know in the front office if I was a guy or a gal. And because I was, but if you go back and speak with Pepper Burris, who was our athletic trainer with the New York Jets, whom I've still been blessed to work with long distance and been in touch with over the years. He's been with Green Bay Packers for years. I'm still very blessed to be consulting in the NFL and working around different spine strategies. A couple of the young women, the young woman who was just hired up with Denver, Lauren Landau, is a good friend of mine, and he's a visionary, and I'm so grateful that he brought on my friend up there. Anyway, very exciting, just absolutely unbelievable everything that's going on in the NFL right now.
So I wanted to move into your Olympic career. Can you tell us then what has your involvement been with the Olympics? And I know that you were supposed to be doing Tokyo. Obviously, it was supposed to be this year. I know you will hopefully be doing Tokyo next year as well.
I don't know. I was in preparation in a series of 3 of my different international athletes had qualified for the Olympiad, but due to COVID again, and in Los Angeles, all the facilities are shut down. It's just been very, very difficult in our arena, and it makes me very sad, which is why I believe it's critical through the dark times, and I've been through many of them in my life, that's where I lovingly say that we reinvent ourselves. That's if you take a seed or a thought and you bury it in soil, there's always a lot of manure in that soil. So sometimes you feel like you're buried in a pile of poo-poo, but out of that has to be growth. And so I see these moments of loss as that it's a time for us to gestate, a time to refocus our energies on what our true gifts are, which is why I'm here in Georgia, working with a local university, mentoring their students in the engineering program to work on my 9 patents and give the world the fitness technology makeover that I believe that we could potentially still continue to make a difference. And every person at home who wants to train their core has the ability to do so. So specifically to answer your question, 1984 was my first Olympiad where I worked with the track and field athletes. And also we had like the South Korean volleyball program come on. So my job was to train the South Korean volleyball program. Numerous athletes that were there. I could rattle off a bunch of names that y'all probably wouldn't know. Dwight Stones, James Butts, Dan Ripley. And this picture here with the great Marcus Rogan, I was hired by Austria and I was part of the Austrian team. As an Austrian I had many Austrian people in London walking up to me, trying to speak Austrian to me. And I'm like, sorry, I don't speak German. Sorry. But I was blessed to get so much publicity in mainland Europe that it was just a very big blessing again to work with probably one of their greatest swimmers of all time, 4-time Olympian.
Okay, so as well as the NFL and the Olympics, you also have a hand in the golfing world, but this time as an athlete rather than a coach. How on earth did you become a 2-time world long drive champion? Please tell all.
Not a great golfer. I don't pretend to be a great golfer. With a reattached left arm, I never thought I'd be blessed ever to become a professional athlete. And in 2001, in my rookie year, that's this top right picture there. I was, at the age of 40, became a professional athlete sponsored by Nike and Titleist and had free everything thrown at me. I was so blessed to be able, I never thought I would actually be winning anything, never mind be a world champion, never mind then becoming a 2-time world champion, which is then the picture at the bottom from 2003, where I had 330 yards against the great Laura Davies and Sophie Gustafsson. You would probably know them. And I beat them in a head-to-head drive out with 15 of the longest driving women in the world, it was very exciting. And so some of my biggest passions, I said, folks could argue with the fact that I'm a woman, but when I walk into a room full of men and they hear that I can hit a golf ball 330 yards, it's genderless.
Yeah.
So I truly have, even though maybe the NFL didn't acknowledge, the job we did, but I realized if you want to be heard, you need to still have expressions that are timeless and genderless. And golf is so objective that it offered me this magnificent platform to express that. And I was one of the first women over 40 to be highlighted in a swimsuit in Sports Illustrated. I was bending a golf club behind my back. It's a embarrassing picture, but it's actually on social media somewhere, and you can go back and find it. And you can see I was written up there. I just was very blessed with literally being a professional athlete all the way up. This year was just in 2017. You'll see on the scoreboard there where it says 330. That's actually me hitting 330 yards. I was over the age of 55. So to date, I'm the longest driving woman in the Masters category, though there is still no women's Masters category. I had to compete against women a third my age.
Oh, wow.
Now, I don't know about you, but I know truly that my 20-year-old would have kicked my 60-year-old's butt. Not that I'm 60 today. I'm not quite yet there, but I'm knocking on the door. But, what's in a number? It doesn't matter. I mean, if you take good care of yourself, to me, it's just, there are a lot of different things that we can discuss. Women in menopause, is your life over? Are you as a professional athlete just let out to, no, sorry, there's nowhere else for you to express your athleticism. So you have to reinvent yourself. And that's what I've spent my life doing. I don't like no. I like saying, well, then what else can we do? And what else can we do to get a good word out and make a difference? And that's, to me, what my whole life's platform was about. It wasn't about hitting a golf ball or becoming a world champion. Just happens to be something that I did, but that's not what defines me.
Absolutely. So I have one last question, and it's a complete selfish question. Okay. So I've started going down to the driving range. I absolutely love the whole thing, being in your little own space, just having 100 balls, working your way through it. Okay. I'm still stuck on a 7-iron because I cannot hit a ball with a driver. So if you could give me one piece of advice as how to improve my drive, what would that be?
Okay. Well, I'm just going to give you my 3 coaching tips that I tell every person who loves this game.
Okay.
And I'll have a few asides underneath each one of these 3 points. So again, being a coach and teacher, this is what I do. So here are my best 3 tips to you. And I put them on your refrigerator. I put them on a Post-it. And everywhere that you sit and spend the majority of your time, find a way to execute these lifelong 3 rules that are as immutable as the laws of gravity.
Okay.
Rule number 1 is posture equals power. It always has. It always will. The spine is designed to have curves in it. It's not designed to be trained straight or at an aggressive end range. So posture equals power. I'm not anti-flexion. I'm not anti-extension. I'm just anti-staying in those positions too long. And so the goal would be to find a way to move through these zones of functionality and reinstate the curves that we're born with.
Okay.
That's point number 1.
Okay.
Point number 2 is practice makes permanent, not perfect. Otherwise, we'd all just be perfect. And that is, as you know, not true because none of us are. And so I planted these perfect patterns and have invested my life in form, in objective, realistic, quantitative, measurable results that are highly objective. And to me, understanding objective, evidence-based training and not letting it be fanciful or the fad. I've seen everything come and go in 40 years at least 2 or 3 times. And ultimately, it comes back to these 3 rules. If you assess every single thing you're doing, whether it's a golf swing or whether it's a squat or whether it's a deadlift, you're going to find coaching nuances, but it must be based on your own personal gift. As individualized as your fingerprint is as personalized as your postures are. So you need to figure out how your body moves, how your joints move, the lumbosacral region or your pelvic bones, the innominate bones with the 3 big bones in the pelvis. You need to understand where your hip is at. And there are different genomes and different hip descents and hip mobilities that have to be addressed. So a Celtic hip might not be able to squat as deep as possibly an Eastern European hip. There's nothing new I'm saying here. This just means we need to be smart with how we train ourselves and how we train our athletes. Practice makes permanent. So we can injure a joint, and this is a complete aside. My peers, and I say this with all the sadness in my heart, many of us were told, hey, you have to do a deep squat. But now I'm looking at women, 10 years my junior, who've been squatting and deadlifting outside of their end ranges, and now they have no more knees and hips. We're living with replacements in an injury. I'm coming up on 60. I've been very blessed to still, be healthy and functioning at a high level. I still have swing speeds, that are above 110 to 120 miles an hour. But I work hard on this every day with my posture equals power and with practice makes permanent, letting the research and the objectivity drive that process.
Okay.
Number 3 is my 4 F's. 4 F's is form, with a lot of fun. And if there's not fun, you're not going to do it. And that's all I'm saying. So to me, in your world, go to the driving range with your 7-iron and have fun. Hire a great golf coach who understands your personalized swing. All right. But I would hire a man and tell him, or a woman, and say, I want to swing like a guy. Do not teach me the girly, lopey, dopey swing. I want to actually throw. I want to, don't be limited by the gender biases that are always out there. Because on paper, we're going to be given one thing, but our hearts and our human spirit are always underestimated. And so we can never underestimate another's human spirit or that, but that's exactly what the westernized medical community has set as the standard. Even the body fat, even the BMI, all of the stuff that should be so old and archaic, it's still out there and still prolific, making young men and women feel bad about what they look like, about them being obese. And yet I'm still 200 pounds. I'm still a 5'11" woman. I mean, what are you going to do? That's the gift God gave me. So I've used it to hit a golf ball a long way and move a lot of weight in my lifetime. And the goal is follow those 3 rules. And I guarantee you're going to find more speed. Once you feel confident with the practice makes permanent rule, add speed and mix. Add speed and mix. And I'll leave you on, this is what I was just teaching. This is one of my teaching points, is that in life, we soar as great coaches and athletes. And maybe this sounds trite, but I'm just going to say it anyway, because I had all of this great information just grilled into me by some of the greatest coaches. So I'm just paying it forward for whoever is out there. This is not me preaching. This is just me doing my very best to inspire and plant a seed. You might have 5 people away from you. It may not help you, but share this story with somebody who needs hope today. There are 4 basic rules to flight that make an airplane fly. Those same 4 rules are what help great athletes and great coaches soar. That's what we call lift and thrust, weight and drag. So great engineers study the human body before they built the Verrazano Bridge in New York, before they built the Golden Gate Bridge. Some of these great engineers were great anatomists, because we as a human body are the greatest engineered feat of all time in all of creation, my humble opinion. If you can figure out what makes an airplane fly and you can soar and overcome gravity, to me, that's overcoming and understanding how to utilize lift, how to utilize weight, how to find your thrust, and how to honor the drag that's always pulling us down. But if it weren't for the drag and the weight, we couldn't fly. So at the end of the day, the most critical thing is what lifts your thoughts today, what allows us to lift another athlete today. And let's put our priorities on the right track as coaches, as people, as human beings. We're all in this together. I don't care if you're purple, green, gay, straight, black, white. I don't care. What we need to do is we're human beings. We're all amazingly perfect because God didn't make no junk. And that's all I'm saying, is that we can actually lift each other up. We can utilize that thrust of a big group, like a big engine, like a big surge, whether it's the woman in the NFL or whether it's trying to find a way to support whatever it is. We can do this together. And there's always going to be the weights, there's always going to be the drags, but know that that's what creates flight. Because if it weren't for the weight and the drag, flight would never occur. So we as coaches and athletes and teachers have to soar and overcome gravity and find a way to fly. And that's all I've tried to dedicate my life to doing.